In 3, 2, we're live!
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, never mind, 2 seconds. 1, and we're here. Look, this is started on time. Thank you all for being here. Quick housekeeping things. Bathrooms are in the back. Who's first time meeting here? First time at a NAC meeting? Really? Everybody's been here before. 1, 2. Okay, 2.
Frankenstein.
Well, anyway, thank you for coming. Since most of you have been here before, thank you for coming back. My name is Kurt Bartan. I'm the president of the Winchester NAC. Ken Pyle, in the back over here, manning the camera back there. He's our vice president. We have Barbara Morey over here as our treasurer, right back there. And we have 2 open positions here, secretary and communications. So if anybody has the interest and desire to take any one of those, especially the communications one, we would really love to have you just let us know, and we'll do that. Just also so you know, we're live streaming this. This will be available in real time right now, as well as on demand on our Facebook page, or our website, which will link to the Facebook page, and it goes to the public Facebook page. Okay, and we will get started. Quick overview of our agenda. Right now we're doing kind of the Winchester NAC business. We're just going through some of the things, and this is our agenda as we go through. The main course, if you will, is the Chris Lepe presentation from Transform. So that's really the exciting part of this. We're going to go through this fairly quickly, so unless you have something that you have questions on, a lot of this is going to be status, just to give you some information. If you have questions, just kind of put your hand right up and stop us, and that's fine. Otherwise, we're just going to keep moving right through. Okay? Any questions? Procedurally? No? Did everybody register? Everybody's registered and punched in? Or everybody signed in? Yeah? Could we do that because this is all sponsored by City of San Jose through the Beautify SJ grant. So we just have to track everybody, not literally everybody, but how many people are here so that we can continue to get funding for this. Okay? And that's funded to help pay for the food and the space and all that. All right. One of the things, so before we get into our mission, a couple of just recognizing some public officials that are here. We'll start off with in the back, right here, Teresa O'Neill from the City of Santa Clara, Councilmember O'Neill, who should also be on our panel tonight. We also have in the back Supervisor Cortez's office. Hello, thank you very much for coming here today. We have Rod Sinks, right, from Cupertino, Councilmember. We have Chappie Jones' office in the back, Vice Mayor Jones Cassidy in the back over there. We were just over there. So and we also have a representative from Councilmember Deb Davis' office back here. So thank you for coming by today. Anybody else that we missed from either city? Anybody else? No, what's what you?
Well, we've got Jim Carter and Gary Cunningham are with the Neighborhoods Commission.
Oh, great! Yeah, Neighborhoods Commission. Thank you. And you're with the Airports Commission.
I am.
Right?
Bob Levy with the Santa Clara County Planning Commission.
Santa Clara County Planning Commission. Okay, great. So one of the things we like to do as a group, which will look familiar, is kind of share what our vision of this organization is. This is a neighborhoods that borders 3 different cities, or it includes 3 cities. A little bit of Santa Clara, a chunk of San Jose, and a little bit of Campbell. It starts at Prudridge and goes down to Hamilton and is bordered by 880-17 and Saratoga. So you can kind of imagine that kind of big rectangle, kind of oblong rectangle. So in the north part of Santa Clara, in the middle part, it's D6 and D1 from San Jose, and the bottom is Campbell. So our mission here is to ensure quality of life and economic development in the Winchester area, Winchester region through innovation. That's really our mission here, is how can innovation really help our lives get better and improve our lifestyle. Okay? So now we always have an opportunity for the council member or the council member's offices to speak and share any updates. If you have any questions, as long as we don't go too far off track. We want to stay on track and we respect everybody's time. We're always making it available for the Vice Mayor, Debbie Davis, who's in Santa Clara. She's councilmember for D6 in Santa Clara, and also Teresa O'Neill, because she's Councilmember Teresa O'Neill. She's also been very involved in this area. So, any council member updates that you want to make with Teresa or Cassidy?
I don't have any particular updates, but just so everyone knows, the Vice Mayor is planning on releasing hosting his Innovation Zone Press in January, so keep an eye out for that. And if there's any questions, feel free to contact me. I'll have my card up at the front.
So it's about Innovation Zone update. We actually have a slide on that, so we're going to cover maybe that if there's any updates that we missed, or you can jump right in. Anything from Councilmember Dave?
I don't have much updates, but we did, as we closed probably a little further away, but we just did, we're going to put in some improvements at Co Avenue, and then also doing a stop sign over there. So in case if anybody's driving over at Co Avenue, we're going to be putting a stop sign in, so that means you got to stop versus speeding. So, because there's a major speeding problem over there. So it's going to be probably like 6 to 8 weeks that's going to be done. But if you're on our email list or something like that, we'll probably be putting it on our email list and also on social media. So that's about it. Thank you, though. Thanks.
Is there anything to share from Santa Clara perspective?
Well, under the auspices of Vice Mayor Jones's office, we were approached to participate in the Innovation Zone, and you're going to talk more about that.
We do.
The rest of my colleagues are a little more leery than I am, so that's kind of, Santa Clara's official participation's a little bit on hold, but we did agree to we passed a resolution committing to participate in the transit corridor study that will go all the way from Diridon to De Anza. So I think that will be very interesting. I think San Jose has already been getting some responses to RFI. There's, I think, maybe over 30 or something, I think I heard.
Yeah, I think it was over 20.
23.
Yeah, so quite a lot of different ideas from a wide range of groups. And so for Santa Clara, we're very busy. We're starting to work on the multimodal transportation plan that has been mandated or is a requirement because of our related Santa Clara that's going to be started, and I'm also working to actually pull up the study for the potential redesign of the Great American Station, so that we can truly, we can look at increased capacity into the 4 Capital Corridor, ACE, as well as the light rail and the bus network that goes through there. So that's kind of what's going on in Santa Clara.
Great, thank you. And also, I saw Steve come in from the Planning Commission, Santa Clara Planning Commission. So welcome. Okay, so great. And again, anything comes up, you can just kind of stop us. And next piece I have is actually, Ken, we're going to switch because these next few slides are on you.
Okay. We will see what they are. I'm also chair of the D1 Leadership Group, and I just wanted to, all these videos are online, so I will not go through videos, but if you go to d1leadershipgroup.com, and I think it's the second thing down there, the second link is the general meeting we had on Saturday night. So we have 3 videos of interest. They're kind of lengthy, but one is on a new method of park credits that the city is looking at providing for developers, so that's something to watch. Climate smart presentation from Mary Tucker talking about the city's effort regarding changes that we can all make to improve the climate in our area. And the one that to me is maybe the most significant is a guy I met through a San Jose Spotlight, I believe, article, or San Jose Inside article. He indicates he's a court-appointed special advocate, retired tech guy, and he indicates that 20% of the homeless are accounted for by only 6/10 of the population, and those are foster kids. So he's starting a program, and I have several of the pamphlets that are available, and what he's asking for is just people to take the pledge to help him in his efforts. It's a totally private network, but it's about creating a social network, a true social network that these kids, now adults, never had. Or maybe they're teenagers now. So there's these pamphlets, there's some over there. And there's one other thing that is not on here, but Gary and Jim Carter are here from the Neighborhoods Commission. I know they want to talk a little bit about the budget type stuff. So, Gary?
We hit the budget last time, and it's the budget request going out for input, neighborhood level input to the San Jose budget. So we got the flyer out there. It's on the D1 website. I need the responses back by the first week in January so we can plug it into the Neighborhood Commission's recommendations to the city. So I just wanted to say that tonight's meeting is very timely. One of the items on the Neighborhood Commission work plan is transportation. And a couple of months ago we had the autonomous vehicles. So this forum has been very good in presenting issues that really deal with citywide issues, not only Winchester, NAC. And they take it back to the neighborhood commission. So Jim's here, he's aware of that because of what came up from these meetings, so it's citywide. So this will get some visibility, at our meetings. So these are very timely meetings, very good participation. So I want to thank you and Kirk for sponsoring these.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Jim, for doing that, because it is something that's very regional. One last D1 leadership / it's really a WNAC effort. Go ahead, you can flip it, Kirk, if you want. About a month ago, on October 19th, we had a community meeting at Pueblo Play. That's the 1.9-acre park. It's going to be, it's a blank slate right now. Well, not exactly blank. There's a Sharks playground there. There's a preschool. Tracy is right there working with the kids. A preschool and a terrific community garden. Joe, you're here somewhere. Raise your hand. Joe and Keith just do an outstanding job to truly create a community playground. It is a playground of vegetables and stuff. It's really cool. So we've got some great assets there, and what we're trying to do is work with the Parks Department to make sure that what we're building makes sense in the long term and that we learn from it. So we kind of test things, and instead of spending a bunch of money up front and find, well, we didn't really build what we thought we should, we kind of iterate in the way of your friend Ken. Okay, Innovation Zone, that's going to be you, right, Greg?
Yeah,
both of us were at the meeting last night, but I'll let you take the lead.
Yeah, so this touches a little bit on what Teresa was talking about. Ken and I both actually spoke at the Santa Clara Council meeting. This was on the agenda in favor of this. And the concerns that were brought up, the biggest concern that we heard, so the basic gist is we want, Chappie has this innovation zone which basically goes from Prune Ridge to 280, from Saratoga to 17. So it's basically the top chunk of the NAC area. It's literally the entire top part of the Winchester NAC space. But it incorporates both San Jose and Santa Clara to the north. So Chappie's, Vice Mayor Jones is asking, how do we make this work well? And he's asking for participation from Santa Clara. And unfortunately, because it's a little bit nebulous and it's not really clear what is the innovation zone, what is it going to do, and that's part of, to me, the beauty of it is, what is it? The council members are like, well, we have other priorities and things like that. The biggest one, though, is there was a lack of information. They said there was a lack of information from Councilmember Jones, that's wrong, sorry, it doesn't say, it should say Vice Mayor Jones. Vice Mayor Jones' office, and I'm just messenger here. I'm not interpreting because that's just what was said. There was, what does this mean? Can't write a blank check. San Jose's asking us to write a blank check. Staff resources are already constrained. It's in a residential area. It's maybe the wrong area. What's in it for Santa Clara? And what are some examples of what will be there? And so that's kind of the concerns that they've had. But as Councilmember O'Neill talked about, they did not say they weren't going to participate. They're just saying until we know more, we're not comfortable saying let's agree to do something without clarity and having resources, even from San Jose's side. Is that a fair representation?
Yes.
Yeah. And get that?
Yeah, no, I think it's great.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions on that? And we were really excited about this, and I think a lot of us continue to be excited about what this is. It's unfortunate that the reality is San Jose is in a wedge of Santa Clara on the north side of Stevens Creek. So if San Jose wants to do it on their streets, it's still going to kind of loop around there. The difference is it's not going to be integrated in any way at this point, unless Santa Clara comes on board.
You keep using the word integrated a lot. That's great. Long time ago, when Pete Constant was our councilman, we did a thing called the Vision, Winchester Boulevard Vision 2020, and we had a great big book talking about what is Winchester Boulevard corridor going to look like in the year 2020. I'm just wondering how this would integrate with that Vision 2020.
Well, that's a really good question. I've never even heard of it.
Never even heard of
Never heard of Winchester 2020. Before my time, I get so.
Well, Pete
Yeah.
Constant had a team of at least 15 people that worked on it for 6 months and got a great big book this thick Do you remember it?
I remember it
You
clearly.
remember it clearly.
Hours and hours of
I'm
work.
just wondering how all of these
So the-
things are all gonna integrate, that
Yeah,
we're
so
gonna
the-
use integrate, you know.
So to be clear, I would suggest maybe Vice Mayor Jones's office can maybe look into that.
That would- you know,
Winchester
that would be-
2020.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this doesn't, it's not in contrast to like our general plan 2040, which is currently what we're going off for the area, but it's just kind of in addition to or to
It
complement.
might be,
Oh, go ahead.
didn't mean to interrupt, might be a topic of this group that someone from Vice Mayor's office could come and present what it was done in the 2020, so we get a refresher course on
Refresher,
what's
yeah.
going on. Now, one of the things that it didn't say, we didn't say we wanted used car lots on Winchester Boulevard. Yet there are used car lot on Winchester Boulevard. So I'm just kind of wondering, why do we spend all this time? and money?
We'll take the action to follow up with the Vice Mayor's
She
office.
was
to-
to come
to-
next time and talk about it.
Next meeting we have, we will give you an update. We'll commit to at least finding out either we've heard something or haven't heard something or link to it.
Hopefully our secretary-elect will take.
Yeah, the
this
secretary
on.
will. Who's the secretary again?
Richard's the last one talking.
Secretary-elect, we'll write that down.
So, moving along to the next item, again, we're not gonna spend too much time on this because Councilmember O'Neill spoke about this. But the Stevens Creek corridor study is different than the innovation zone. The innovation zone was very specific, as like kind of like a platform. This is more like, this is a study of the corridor itself, and it's going from De Anza down to Dearborn, I think. I think it goes all the way down, even though it's part of St. Carlos. But I believe it goes all the way through. And this is VTA, it's San Jose, it's Santa Clara, it's Cupertino. So it's not just one city trying to drive this, where Vice Mayor Jones always really driving the innovation zone piece. This is VTA driving this at a regional level to look at what can transportation look like on Stevens Creek, or in that whole corridor. And that did get supported by the Santa Clara last night, the council, so they did support that. They were very excited about that, as also a way for the cities to work together rather than to not work together. Okay, and then the next.
Yeah, go ahead. I just took a note for, so we'll know that. So, the last 2 weeks, I've been to a bunch of conferences all around transportation. 2 weeks ago, it was at the Pod Car City Conference, and that's where you'll see a couple of these overheads. Yesterday, it was Prospect SB, and today it was ID Tech X. And so my head's bursting, so hopefully I'll be able to get through this. And at the pod, okay, so which one is it again?
The bumping one.
Okay.
I already bumped that.
At the Pod Car City Conference, this is all about automated technology to move people. And it started off with the idea of kind of the old monorail type stuff in Disneyland. They were looking at stuff that's on rails or on, what are those things called, gondolas or whatever, right? And in fact, San Jose State has been pushing this for a long time. They've got a mechanical engineering professor there, and they're doing great things with the students. And their goal is to connect the North Campus and the South Campus with this kind of personal rapid transit, they call it. So these little pods that go back and forth, and all electric, and even solar powered. And then in their scenario, it's above the street. So, you know, kind of like what you'd see at Disneyland, except a modern version of it. So ostensibly, that's what this conference was about, but it was really about much more than that because things have changed, and now they're talking about autonomous last mile shuttles. So one of the speakers was Ramses Madhu from the city of San Jose. He's the one leading up this RFI, which has a group of people, as Kirk mentioned. And this is one of the slides he presented, with the idea being the RFI, there was two elements to it, one between Dearborn Station and the airport, and the other between Dearborn Station and De Anza. So it has to be a multi-jurisdictional effort between the cities of San Jose, Santa Clara, and Cupertino, as well as, VTA should be involved in there too, one would think. And there's another even more interesting slide that he kind of glossed over, but when I actually got the slides, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I don't know if we'll get to that slide or not. Did I miss one of these slides? I thought I did. That same conference, Sam Lott, who's a professor at Texas Southern University in Houston. He also is a consultant for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado, I believe is where they're located. And they've been looking at this concept, which they call an automated mobility district. And the idea is to have a kind of a confined area where you have really design it away from cars. You design for things like these little autonomous shuttles, different kinds of modes, bicycles, whatever. But you have kind of these super blocks where you don't have traffic. Maybe you have parking at the edge and so forth. And so they're looking at this as a way to be more efficient from an energy perspective, as well as just make more livable places. And this shows kind of another picture of it, how you have the features, fully automated and driverless shuttles. It's service constrained to dense area, and you have fixed mix of fixed on-demand and fixed route services. So within that district, you might have on-demand service. So you go out to your front door, the shuttle arrives, you can hop in it, but then it takes you maybe to another place, like a Caltrain station or something in Santa Clara or Diridon, where you get on a fixed rail. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. You don't have to deal with getting in your car, in the garage, going to a place, spending a lot of money parking. It's just kind of door-to-door delivery. And where they're trialing this, well, here, the difference. So there's two terms here, AMD, Automated Mobility Districts, not the company up that competes with Intel, and ATN, Automated Transit Network. So those are the networks I was talking about a minute ago, the idea of putting things on rails and guideways and things like that. So the differences are, and this is a significant one, that you can have multiple technologies. On this automatic mobility district, you're kind of creating a pipe, and in that pipe, you can have a bunch of different fluids flowing there. You can have gasoline, you can have water. You can mix all these different things in this pipe versus having a pipe where you can only have water or something, right? So multiple technologies, and this I think is a key thing. It's kind of like the internet. You have multiple fleet operators. So theoretically, you don't have to go to Google for your search engine. Well, okay, not a bad example. But you can have multiple fleet operators, but it's occupying the same operational space. So in other words, you could have an Uber and a Lyft, competing for business, right? Because you're on this thing. But it also allows different kinds of shapes and technologies and stuff. So this is a company in Britain, Origo, that has 2 to 4 person cars that are operating in certain campuses. This car, anyone recognize what company this is? Oh, it probably says there. Tesla. And you know where this is going to be, or something like this, in 2021? Las Vegas Convention Center. They just broke ground yesterday. So they're going to have these 3 to 16 person. In this case, it's kind of, they're putting it in a tunnel, so it's kind of back to that automated transit network. But the idea is that they're basically have an electric vehicle that they can push people back and forth rapidly. And then there's several companies that have come up with autonomous buses, 30 to 50 type buses, with the technology to automatically brake and drive real close. It was just announced yesterday, I believe, that the Lincoln Tunnel in New York, they're going to trial actually using this so they can get 50% more throughput in buses through the Lincoln Tunnel, which is huge. It'll move more people. It actually does move more people than the train systems into New York City. So and this is something Alan Kornhauser has been advocating for a long time. He's spoken our event before. So with that said, let's go back to capping the freeway, because I think this leads to the presentation tonight from Chris, which we'll hear in a few minutes. It's a perfect lead-in because it's what we've been talking about. When I saw what Chris was doing, I thought, oh my gosh, this is really what we're talking about. We're kind of talking about this, and this is what we've done. We've had the committee, I just skipped over it, and I apologize to everyone who's on the committee. There we go, can raise their hand, and we've got Dick and Gary, and we've kind of met back and forth, but a lot of it's been via email. And the idea with the cap, what we've been trying to do is, this is a real foreign idea around Santa Clara County, but in other places, other parts of the world, people are covering freeways, covering other things, and putting things over, whether it's parks, whether it's buildings, whether it's both. So we've been working on this for, I don't know, 4 years probably. Five, okay. And so we want it to be more than just covering the freeway here at 280. we think it can work into a network around the county and around the bay, really. Why not? It has county-wide effort, but why not bigger? So I just want to give one example. After the last meeting, I accidentally ran into this Urban Land Institute study of Columbus, Ohio. And this, you can see the kind of the picture there. They had an active roadway construction. They were going to add, I think, an exit lane, and you'll see a picture here. They also had a well-organized citizenry said, wait, we can do better than just another off-ramp. They had a willing developer and the city council willing to push and make it a priority. And there was also enough retail in the area to support the development, as you'll see in some pictures. So this is what it looked like before. It kind of looks familiar, right? I mean, amazingly enough, just kind of this ramped side, not taken care of, right? There's probably garbage on there. And then this is what it looks after they built it. What they did was they carved this out, made it straight. You can see now there's this exit ramp, which I'll show you on the other picture, the exit ramp. And then they put the buildings right across. They kind of created this main street, which you'll see on the next slide. They also have these other two things here, which I think were originally supposed to be parks or something, but I don't know exactly what happened. They're actually just a little bit of an open space there. And then this is just another view. You can kind of see it and see where the ramp comes off here, and that ramp didn't exist before. The numbers are amazing. I didn't put all the numbers up there. It was 9.7 million, but I put the footnote.
No.
Oh, okay, there we go. So yeah, it was about $10 million. 7.8 million was development, and then they had the bridges and the preparation costs. And it is amazing. Granted, this is 17 years ago, but it's still amazing it was that cheap at that time. And I've read through this multiple times, so I don't think I'm making a mistake. And in fact, this was even the 1.9 million. They break it down for they had to clear title. They didn't actually own the air rights, so they had to get the air rights, and that cost $50,000. And then just some more pictures. I grabbed these from Google Maps, by the way. I haven't been there yet. I'd love to. But you can see it's kind of this main town and feel. It goes through here. And then the other thing they do, this wraps around. This was actually on the right-of-way, I believe, of the freeway. So they kind of use the side space, too. And then that leads to what they're doing in Houston. So that's kind of the cap thing. Then this whole idea of freeway within a freeway, with the idea of taking lanes that are already there, and granted we're using them for high occupancy vehicles, but those tend to be Teslas with one person in them. So we're not really moving a lot of people when we do that. But what if we allowed multiple transit solutions to run through those buses? And I think that's what Chris is going to be talking about. Well, in Houston, they're doing that. That's their plan, is to have eventually autonomous buses on these throughways, and they're fortunate because they already have, it might be another slide, they already have 100 miles of HOV lane that is actually dedicated. So it's, there's walls there. So they already have been working on this. You can kind of see it here. It's actually dedicated. So this is what they're planning on doing. They've actually started it. They've, I think last June they let the RFI out, and they've started moving students around the campuses. So they've got this confined campus where they're moving kids at a slow speed, and then the idea is to feed them to buses and connect these different automated mobility districts. So this was just showing, kind of shows up kind of strange. I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, VTA asked, well, what about the 280 corridor? What would you like to see on that? And our response was, what if you could create these caps over various important intersections? This is Winchester and 280 here. And in those, they become kind of this interface between the suburbs and the high-speed interfaces you have, right? The freeways. So that you put some density around there, and ideally then the people who are working there could just hop on one of these high-speed electric buses and get to where they have to go. And this was based on Spur telling us at the forum that Vice Mayor had, 75% of the jobs are within a half mile of a major intersection, right? So they're not necessarily today where the rail are, it's within the intersection. So why not use those intersections to our advantage? So that's the concept. This is just a really hokey rendering, taking one of the buildings at Santana Row and just plopping it over the freeway. And coincidentally, it's about the same, area size. So this is all just to set up Chris's presentation, where he's going to talk about ReX. So I hope that was a good setup.
That was
for you.
great. Yeah, thank you, Ken.
And hey, it's 7 o'clock, right when we
Yeah.
said we'd start.
Yeah.
And Chris comes from Transform CA, is that what you guys are?
Transform.
Transform, and you guys have been looking at how you solve the problems we have in mobility around here, right? I probably did not give it a good description, but I'll let you do that, and thank you for coming out.
Sure, thank you. Good to be back in this neighborhood. I'm just gonna put a little timer here. I was actually here yesterday at the tree lighting ceremony at Santa Row, so I'm sure you guys all experienced that crazy traffic and human density collision. Haven't quite really seen anything like that in this area before, so it's definitely a spectacle to behold. So let me just go ahead and grab a pointer. So yes, my name is Chris Lepe. I'm the Regional Policy Director for Transform. I've been with the organization for about 13 years now, and what we do is we're essentially advocates for better public transportation and other mobility options, and really coming at the work from a climate standpoint and also an equity lens. We also are advocates for walkable communities, the kind of stuff that you guys are talking about here as well. And what I'm going to talk to
interrupt, but
Yeah.
just curious, who pays your bills?
a variety of sources, just like any nonprofit, right? So we get foundation support, individual supporters like yourselves, government contracts and whatnot, and it depends from one year to the next. In the past, we were really foundation heavy in terms of who funded us, and now it's shifting to more government grants.
Government.
So we're doing like consulting work, for example, in places like Portland and LA, as well as cities like Oakland and whatnot.
Where are you located?
Thank you.
Where are you located?
So our main office is in Oakland, and we also have 2 satellite offices, one in San Jose near City Hall, and another one in Sacramento. So we do statewide legislative work. We're really focused in the Bay Area for the most part, but we do kind of do a little bit of work here and there outside. So, but like I said, our primary mandates as an organization, our focus is really climate and equity, and trying to think about land use and transportation solutions that advance both at that intersection. I don't have to tell you all about the crisis that we're in on the climate front, but I thought it would be, I think, a powerful thing to show you. This is from UC Berkeley. What you see here are cool and wet and cool and dry years on the left-hand side, and hot and wet and hot and dry years on the right. And notice over time the trend, and it gets real ugly as we get closer to the now period. Horrible, right?
You have flames bursting on one.
That is why we have
Terrible.
this, right? And I think one of the last slides that I'm going to show you in this presentation is the cost of the ReX network. But part of the question around cost that we should always ask ourselves is, what is the cost of inaction, right? What is the cost of continuing with the status quo? And if we're going to talk about addressing the climate crisis, we have to talk about transportation, we have to talk about our built environment, because over 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the state of California come from transportation. But what's driving those emissions? A lot of it has to do with the way that we planned our cities. You all are intimately familiar with this, living and working in an area that is predominantly auto-oriented, where we have separated land uses. You've heard the whole sort of spiel, I'm sure. You live it every day, low density communities that are cut off, not coordinated with one another, right? And in recent years, we've been making the situation worse. Building a whole lot of job-oriented uses. We've got a lot of jobs being created and very little housing being created to balance that. So you have some cities out there that are rolling out the red carpet for jobs, but at the same time saying, well, you know what, the Central Valley can or other places, San Jose, can house our workforce. And so this is a schematic of Mountain View. This was in 2011. And the situation that you get in a lot of cities, including particularly along the peninsula, is these are the employee residents, and those are the residents. The employment, the folks that work in the city and the folks that live in the city. And notice the overlap there. In a lot of cities, you only have 1 out of every 10 workers actually live in the city. And so where do those folks come from? They come from places like San Jose. They come from places outside, further beyond. And a lot of those folks that are getting pushed out, by the way, because of the rising rents as a result of the lack of production, are lower income people that would tend to use transit, that are the base of VTA's, for example, bus network. And VTA, Samtrans, AC Transit, all these agencies are struggling with the situation right now where folks, their ridership base are getting pushed outside of the traditional core where they used to live, where transit is great, or at least somewhat efficient. And the result is we got new people moving in, and those people own cars, and those people drive. And the other effect is suburban sprawl. I don't know if you have driven through Central Valley as of late, places like Mountain House, just over the hill. When was the last time you guys drove through there on 580? Yeah.
I have my girlfriend's family bought a place in the community every day.
Yeah, and the irony is you think, 10 years ago you thought, oh, the commute's not that bad, but then everybody else thinks the same thing, and there we go, right? But I was just passing by 580, and you see like non-stop, just as far as I can see, light posts, these communities that are being built that are completely auto-oriented, basically building effectively the equivalent of another San Jose in many of these parts, right? Where everybody, for the most part, is going to be forced to drive. And where are they coming? They're coming to the jobs over here, right? This is where the jobs are at. But the effect, of course, on climate, you can see this map that we created, is the areas that are further out from the urban core are really intense in terms of their carbon emissions, but also, of course, they're much more unaffordable. So you have folks like Andrea Aguirre, who moves out further out and saves some money on housing, but then is hit with the transportation costs, is hit with extra stress, and then that ends up impacting everybody, including us here in Santa Clara County, who have seen the mega commuter population grow significantly in recent years. And when we think about mega commuters, we think about other folks, not the folks that live here. There's a lot of folks that, for example, live in San Jose, in South San Jose or Morgan Hill, that are being impacted by the traffic coming from outside. So that's why you see that 85% jump, because you guys experience it. Everybody's seeing a rise in traffic, and we're spending more time internally even getting around here in Santa Clara County.
I just got a comment. May I interrupt?
How
Want me to shut up?
about I roll through the presentation?
Yeah,
I'm just giving a little bit of
questions
context.
at the end,
Yeah, let's do that.
But I'll forget what I'm going to say.
Write it down. Write it down. Write it
I'll
down.
forget.
I just want to make sure I stick to the time.
Where's our secretary?
I just want to make sure I stick to the time. And so just, all I'm doing right now is providing a little bit of context from our perspective. And then I'll introduce the project to you, because we haven't even gotten to the project yet, right? But I just wanted to say, a lot of folks live in the now, right? In the past and the now. And what you're all experiencing right now is tons of traffic, right? But when you look at some of these studies, this is the environmental impact. This comes from the environmental impact report for the US 101 Managed Lanes project between Mountain View and I-380. And notice what you see here. So 2013, I used to be existing. 2013, 34 minutes. And with the project, you end up still having an increase in 2020. With no build, it gets a little bit worse, but what happens in 2040? And what you see is on the 101 corridor, just the 101 corridor alone, I'm not speaking about regionally, but this is, I think, sort of an example, is 2 to 4 times worse delay coming in the next couple of decades here. So again, the cost of inaction, right? The cost of inaction is an economic one, it's stress, and so on and so forth. And part of the problem is that we're focused on a model that is the most inefficient from an environmental standpoint, but also from a transportation standpoint. So we're focused on, for the most part, our cities and our roadways are focused on moving private motor vehicles, the 1 person per car model. But that's the least efficient, right? So when we're looking at a corridor like 101, what we see is 3% of the vehicles move 20% of the people, right? 3+. Those folks that are traveling in vehicles that are 3 or more people represent 3% of the vehicles, but they move 20% of the people. Versus solo vehicles represent over 70% of the vehicles, right? Solo drivers, but they only move about 50%. So imagine if we're able to shift over just even a few percentage points of the solo drivers into high occupancy modes, the kind of downstream effects that that can create. And the reality is that, well, I'll ask you, if you were provided with a fast and frequent transportation competitive with driving, how many of you would use it?
Competitive with driving.
Competitive with driving being an operative word. So that's about half of the people in the room. Those of you that didn't raise your hand, your partner, the folks in the other room, that makes your life better, right? For those that jump into the vehicle. And so when MTC did a survey, 71% of respondents said that they drive alone. There's over 1,000 people that they surveyed, and over half of the respondents would use an express bus if it was reliably 10 minutes faster than driving.
I mean, I wouldn't use it if it's 10 minutes slower than driving.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But at least you can get, if you get into that wheelhouse of close to the, to the amount of time of driving, then that's money, right? Then you've got something that you can really, this is a compelling thing. The problem is that our current system, at least, you talked about, it was mentioned already about rail. Only about 20% of our jobs are located near our regional rail network. But also our express bus network that run on our highways is incomplete with multiple providers. Most folks don't even know what's out there because there is no regional map. I had to dig this one up, and it's actually not even accurate because, just from two years later, most of this stuff is no longer current. It doesn't function as a network, and it's stuck in traffic, right? Buses and carpools are stuck in the same traffic as the solo drivers. This is an image of the level of degradation on our carpool network. In the Bay Area. So even in the places where we should have that incentive to carpool and to take transit, there isn't an incentive, right? So one of the solutions that's out there, and this is the first component of our proposal to MTC, the Regional Transportation, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Bay Area, is the express lanes. So there's already a regional express lane network that's planned for the Bay Area. But as you can see here, all the areas in red are the areas that are not feasible at this point to widen. These are areas where there's not enough space, and so therefore they are, right now, gaps in the network and will continue to be so in the future. So in all these areas, you're going to have bottlenecks, right? You're going to have a situation where you're in a hot lane, express lane, and then you hit these red areas, and so much for your seamless commute. So our proposal consists of 3 elements. One is to create a seamless express lane network for the Bay Area so that you can get anywhere where you want to go through carpooling and transit and a solo vehicle if you choose to pay the fee to get into the lane, which is, if any of you know, express lanes are variable fees for solo drivers to get into if there's enough space and capacity. But the key thing here is then we have this blank slate, this canvas to then superimpose a transit network and to try to encourage as many carpools and van pools through incentives and programs as possible. And also a little thing that we have here is called TDM, Transportation Demand Management Measures. So different strategies, different opportunities to encourage and incentivize people to travel through more efficient modes. And then finally, incorporate equity strategies. So this would be, for example, perhaps means-based tolls, having things like, for example, affordable transit passes, so free transit eco passes for low-wage workers in downtown areas, similar to what Palo Alto has implemented. And so this proposal was submitted to MTC, again, our MPO, our Metropolitan Planning Organization, that is currently planning for our next regional transportation plan, Plan Bay Area 2050. So as part of Plan Bay Area 2050, they had a call for projects. And they asked the public agencies like BTA, hey, what projects should we be considering to incorporate into the plan? But for the first time ever, they actually opened it up to the public and to NGOs, to non-governmental organizations like ourselves, to submit potential transformative large-scale projects. So we did, and we were selected. 6 out of over 500 submissions throughout the Bay Area were selected infrastructure projects, and there were 6 strategies, kind of policy strategies that were also considered and are now being evaluated by MTC for potential inclusion in Plan Bay Area 2050. So that is one of them. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is the transit component of our proposal. And so I think one of the game-changing things here, a lot of times we ask, well, isn't transit going to take away capacity from the roadway? And taking a lane, aren't you making life worse for the rest of us that are driving in solo vehicles? But we have conducted analyses, and it's been backed up by MTC, that this is on Highway 101, and an example is that if we, leveraging the express lane, if we really go full throttle on providing great transit, carpooling, vanpooling, and other options on the highway, we can go from moving 2,000 people max in a general purpose lane to 8,000 people. And if you think about that, that's doubling the capacity of the highway just in that one lane. It's like building a whole other 101. So what is our transit vision? We had about a month and a half to figure it out. And luckily we had an in-house consultant who did basically most of it pro bono for us. His name is Alan Hoffman, the transit expert. And the whole basis of the network is, as I've already mentioned, running on a future express lane network, right? That would be seamless. So we would have 45-mile-an-hour speeds or better, and would be driving through most of the different destinations. How did we arrive at where these dots and these routes are located? It's all based on where people live, the greatest population densities and the greatest employment densities, and also major destinations like community colleges and hospitals that people really need to get to. So to give you one example from the East Palo Alto hub, to get to some of these closer hubs, we have 30 hubs throughout the Bay Area, or the kind of major transit centers as part of our proposal. You can see our travel time on ReX estimated at, for example, let's see, to Newark, 15 minutes, right? And congested auto time, 55 minutes. If you're going to Newark, what are you going to take?
ReX.
And if you don't, then hey, that's your choice. But be faster in ReX.
Is it proven in other cities?
We'll get. That's a good question. We should definitely get to that.
What was the question?
The question is it proven in other cities? And we'll get to that in the discussion period. So here's an example of the kind of analyses that we and Alan conducted, looking at where folks are traveling to in these employment zones, traveling from, and thinking about how we structure this proposal. Now, if you just drop people off in the middle of a highway, are they going to use the system? And we know from, for example, VTA's light rail on Highway 87 that it's not enough just to have a transit station in the middle of a freeway and expect people to be able to get from there to wherever else they're going, especially if you have non-transit supported land uses surrounding the stations, which is definitely the case for much of VTA's light rail system along the highway. And so what we also did as part of this proposal is that we connected the ReX hubs to the key destinations through frequent routes. So we can call them ReX Link shuttles, ReX Link routes, ReX Link loops, and each of these are 10-minute frequencies, right? So you're never going to wait more than just a few minutes to get onto one of these connectors. And the ReX Express routes that are running on the highways are every 5 minutes during the peak and 10 minutes during off-peak, and they're actually a 24-hour system, so you even have owl services in the middle of the night. So what does this look like in Santa Clara County? So this is an overarching snapshot here. So you can start getting a sense of, it connects to De Anza College, to San Luis State, San Pedro Square, the major employment centers to the north, like Moffett Park, and Google, and so on and so forth, Mission College. It's basically everywhere you really want to go, including where? Right here, Santana Row, and this neighborhood, Winchester. So here's a zoomed in view of the kind of southern, mid-southern part of the proposal. This is the portion that goes to Cupertino, and you can see the connectors that get you from the Cupertino hub to, for example, the Apple campus, the Kaiser Hospital there on Lawrence. You've got the Cupertino Civic Center and Deanza College. And then the northern Santa Clara portion where it gets you to, for example, the Great America VTA Light Rail Station, connecting to, and that's one of the other things, by the way, it connects and it weaves in together our existing transit networks into coherent whole, right? So it makes our existing transit system even more functional. And so one of the other effects is that this is our current transit coverage area. It's about a quarter-mile radius around our current transit systems in kind of the northern portion of Rapid, right? Light rail and Caltrain in the northern portion of Santa Clara County. You can see the amount of additional coverage that ReX would provide. Imagine how many more residents would have access to efficient service. So in terms of the cost, I know that was one of the questions that was posed. The total cost for both capital and operations is somewhere between $10 to $20 billion for the entire regional network. And you think about that and you compare that to, for example, just one rail line, and it actually starts to seem like a pretty good investment. And part of the reason why it's so relatively cost effective is that we're using a lot of the existing infrastructure that we have. Rod Sinks has mentioned before that we are, part of the brilliance of this proposal is that we're leveraging all these grade separations that we have on our highways, right? So that we don't, the transit system already is working off of a network that is not going to be getting stuck on the in the lights, right? And getting stuck in traffic. So anyway, it's building off of our existing infrastructure and then adding more infrastructure, such as these rail-like stations and obviously the vehicles, to be able to create a world-class transit experience. So with that, I am actually early. I will say a few next steps. There are close to 100 different projects that are being considered as part of large-scale projects as part of Plan Bay Area 2050. And the decision as to what will make it in, what will be selected, because there's a huge amount of costs that are represented by all these different projects. The decision as far as what is actually going to get selected, is going to make it into Plan Bay Area 2050, is going to happen within the next few months. So by March, April, there will be a draft blueprint for the region that will be released by MTC. And then in June will be the final blueprint. And at that point, once the final is voted on, it just goes into environmental review. So that's part of the reason why I'm here, presenting, answering questions, want to get your input, but also hopefully earn your support and hope that you can express your support to MTC. We only have a few months to be able to get this across the goalposts. So
I think what we're going to do now is we're going to transition into kind of a semi-panel, and Councilmember VTA Chair O'Neill, you will come up with us. And, Councilmember Sinks from Cupertino, do you want to join us too?
Sure.
Okay, so
should I answer any kind of clarifying questions, or you want to do the
Well, I was thinking we can start the discussion. We'll start with Councilmember O'Neill, or VTA Chair O'Neill, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier. If you have any comments or questions for Chris, and then Councilmember Sinks, if you have any, then we'll go to the audience. And I've got questions too, but I'll wait on mine. But you can sit here, and then I'll kind of moderate as far as the questions from the audience. But Councilmember O'Neill, or VTA Chair O'Neill.
Chris, am I here too?
Sure.
So, well, I find the concept very interesting, and one of the things that at VTA, kind of with the board and the senior leadership, we have been talking about how do we transform, and how do we kind of migrate to having more, focusing on corridors and being able to be transportation integrators. And so, I mean, I see how something like this could fit into it. One of the things that when you say in your timeline for MTC to make a decision, so can you talk a little, talk a little bit more about that? Like, so all these proposals that have been submitted, I'll have to go, are they like, I remember when they did that call. Are the ones that they selected, are they on the website, or their website?
Yeah, so they have one web page where it's all the transformative project finalists, so it's about a dozen of them. But I don't think there's like a one-stop shop where you can see all of the projects, like 95 or whatever there are that are being evaluated. But the evaluation for most of those projects has actually already been completed, so you can see what the performance of those projects are, including, for example, BART to Gilroy, BART to Millbrae. There's quite a few different projects, including here in the South Bay, that have been proposed, and that MTC has said, okay, well, this has positive or negative outcomes for equity, has a really good benefit cost ratio for multiple other outcomes, and so that's something that I can share with the group, but I don't think is like readily available online. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, so I just have a couple of, just so in my own mind, so I know how to. So did the professional staff do all that evaluation?
Yes.
And so will the commissioners, or who will make the final decisions as to
The
what?
commissioners will.
So they'll take whatever the scoring and looking at the valuations and say, we
Mhm.
want to take these 10 or something.
Yeah, theoretically, yeah. And what's interesting is that in the past, when they rated the projects, they said, okay, this is the cream of the cream. We're going to take these, and these are going to make it into the regional transportation plan. But now, what they've opened it up for is like, okay, so these did not perform as well. What kind of complementary policies and strategies can we incorporate so that we can boost the performance, and then have a conversation about whether it makes it in, right? So to give you one example, a lot of the peninsula projects, like Caltrain electrification, score poorly on equity because a lot of the folks that are going to benefit are not lower income folks. Well, so it begs the question, why is that the case? And what can we do to ensure that more people, working class folks, can benefit from Caltrain moving forward, right? So maybe it means a means-based fare for Caltrain. Maybe it means better land use policies, right? More affordable housing production near the station. So anyway, that's it's not as black and white in terms of what's going to make it in based on the performance.
Does everyone know what MTC is, or MTC does?
Why don't you tell us?
Yeah, it might be good if one of you want to take that as far as their role in the world.
Yeah. What's MTC?
Okay, so MTC is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and they're like the regional body that oversees the funding and then planning for transportation projects. It's comprised of representatives from all the counties, and it wasn't that long ago that Santa Clara County got a third representative. So like London Breed and San Licardo and Libby Schaff are like the mayors of the three big cities get a rep, and then like Dave Cortez, he represents the county, and Jeannie Bruins from Los Altos is also like selected by the Cities Association. So each county has representatives. And then a lot of the money that comes in from the state or the feds goes to MTC, and they get to decide how to divvy it up. And they kind of had, they've been kind of behind some of the big projects, and some people kind of roll their eyes with it, like the construction, even though it was technically a Caltrans project, but like the Bay Bridge and the guy that you may have heard the name in the past, Steve Heminger, he was the executive director for a long time, and a lot of people felt he was the most powerful person in the Bay Area, and he was kind of behind the scenes, but he was literally extremely influential in what happened to billions and billions of dollars of spending. So yeah, so they're like a regional governing body, and they're combining with ABAG, which was the Association of Bay Area Governments, and they're trying to merge, because I guess the Bay Area was maybe about the only region, at least in California, where the regional government didn't have like all the planning and the transportation in one body. So in a way, it's kind of like MTC's kind of, their influence is growing, I would say.
I think if you think about equity, you know, how do we get everybody around the region? Every city ought to be building a lot more housing, particularly mine, where we built a lot of jobs. And we ought to recognize that there's a big cost differential based on where housing is built, right? If in my city, I can afford to build X affordable units, well, it turns out in San Jose, as a whole, right, housing is about half the cost. So it does make sense to build it around the region, and I think every city ought to get a share. But then, we have the mobility issue. And I think if you consider the equity factor, if somebody's coming to a job in a restaurant in Cupertino, or teaching at De Anza College, you know, the fact is that really rich people have the luxury of riding on a big corporate bus to Apple or Google or Facebook, right? But what about the rest of us? What about the teachers? What about other folks? There is no solution, for example, from the South Bay on 85 to my city. There's no feasible solution. If I want to go from my city hall to the San Jose airport, if that's where I work and I happen to, you know, that's an hour and 22 minutes on VTA today. If I want to study, if I'm at Diridon Station and I want to go to De Anza College to study, that's an hour, right? The brilliance of what Transform has done is they've said, you know what? We do need some better service on Stevens Creek Boulevard, right? So that's your gray route on the map. So we think it's important to do that, but you know, based on my understanding of VTA studies, were we to put bus rapid transit on Stevens Creek Boulevard, we take that 1 hour trip today to 40 minutes. So we take up some of the roadway to do this, and we'd improve the trip from an hour to 40 minutes. Now, if you have all the time in the world, and I would suggest that folks that are working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet don't have that kind of time, so they're going to do their darndest to get in the car, right? If we had what he's talking about, instead of an hour-long trip or a 40-minute trip, we take advantage of the great separations that are already built in to swiftly move with fewer stops, right, along the freeway corridor that we all take anyway. So I think what I really appreciate about this proposal is the idea that if we could free up those lanes, build new ones, free up what we got to make room for fast transit with high frequency. And those buses went down, but major employers to help pay into this so we could make the capital improvements faster than the public sector could possibly raise money. But if we could get, right, buses zooming by while the cars were in gridlock, guess what had happened? People would start to make that connection, say, hey, I want on that service. That's exciting. So I think that's the brilliance of what's being proposed here. And you know, if we were to coordinate, there's another effort called Seamless Bay Area, coordinate these transit systems together so you have one ticket. If we got bike shares to handle the last mile, as long with the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, and in the future, I think we got to rely on transit agencies really to provide this corridor service. Focus on that. You can't provide buses everywhere, right? You can't go through my neighborhood on a bus. But what you could do is have a transit hub, as is being suggested with ReX. And then, you know, there will be private solutions. Or in my case, in Cupertino, you might have noted that we just started this via shuttle service. So we have vans, we'll take wheelchairs. We're going to the Caltrain station in not Santa Clara. We're going to Sunnyvale, and that by far is our biggest destination. People want to get out of their cars. They can't stand this darn traffic. And if we're able to, through some combination of what cities are able to do, you know, we're funding this out of general revenues, but over time, we have a transportation impact fee. If we're able to handle those last mile connections by whatever means, and then let our transit agencies, right, handle these corridors and get fast, efficient service every 5 minutes. You don't have to schedule your day anymore around that vehicle that only shows up once every 20 minutes or half an hour. That's the revolution.
And I have an idea actually for these stations, the stations like Winchester that are right directly on the highway, is to have like this electronic billboard on top of them. That's cool looking, right? That says how long it's going to take you on, for example, ReX versus how much by driving. And once people see that, oh wow, 20 minutes by ReX versus 45 minutes being stuck here in traffic. I mean, the visual thing is important, but also, I think that would be kind of cool.
So, Chris, while you're on the topic of covering Winchester,
Sure.
what about the idea of using the land above it, the air rights, what we've been talking about for a long time, and again, if you can sell those air rights, maybe you can actually kind of pay for the station and kind of take some of the numbers off there, but then also creates kind of some people living there too.
Yeah.
Could that be integrated into what you're proposing?
Yeah, definitely. And Alan Hoffman
Oh, right, yeah.
has written a book about sort of this concept, right?
Yeah, because he did it in San Diego, Sales to Trails, that's what it's called. And they do have kind of that freeway within the freeway in San
So
Diego.
check it out. Yeah. And actually, I've been to two places in my life where they've done this before, where they're planning. One, and both relatively recently. One's in San Diego, where a buddy of mine that does community development work took me to the freeway cap there.
Yeah, that was the park one.
And yeah, it's the park. And you had families and everything playing on top of the park and whatnot. And then Portland, where I went recently to do some work out there, where they are planning in the Rose Quarter to have a freeway cap with the Oregon Department of Transportation. So, it's a thing. People are doing it, and it's something that, depending on the financing, could be potentially incorporated into the network. And I actually think that when you can combine something like a transportation proposal with something that provides community amenities, such as parks and open space, then all of a sudden you start to have something that's even more compelling. So one of the things that we envision with these hubs is that they can be magnets for future development, and that at the hubs themselves, they could offer things like retail and various different services. So you can say, hey, to your buddy that lives in San Francisco, let's meet at the, let's just give the East Palo Alto hub for lunch. Get there in 20 minutes or whatnot. Have your coffee, have your lunch, whatever. Have your conversation, your meeting, and then go on. And you can have things like laundry services and all those kind. The kind of services that surround transit that you see in so many other parts of the world. That's the kind of thing that we would envision is building off of these and certainly using them as kind of an opportunity to envision what our communities can be moving forward.
Well, with the caps, I don't know if everybody's aware, in San Francisco, they've started construction of the new connector into the Golden Gate Bridge through the Presidio and Prissy Field. The design is incredible, and they've got, different foundations and things. They've got the money. And so they're going to be, that new approach to the Golden Gate Bridge is going to be capped, and it's going to connect the different parts of Presidio.
Another good example is actually, it's not a freeway cap, but it's a similar concept where you're capping concrete, kind of. It's the Salesforce Transit Center. Have you guys been there?
Yeah.
I mean, that gives you an example of what you can do.
Well, and part of the plan, and this is something that I had suggested, so obviously I represent the city of Santa Clara, but I represent all of you on VTA. But one of the points that's been a little controversial is about whether BART should go to Santa Clara, whether it should stop at Diridon or not. And so one of the things is looking at what is the development value, the potential for ridership and all that around Santa Clara. So one of the things that I suggested, and our Nuria Fernandez, our general manager, liked the idea. So the plan now in Santa Clara is, because I said, look, we've got the maintenance yard, we've got the storage yard, and all of that, and that's part of the reason why they want to go to Santa Clara. So they've got the space to do these very functions. And so I said, well, why aren't we just doing that? Why aren't we capping that?
Nice.
And
Like Hudson Yards.
So now, so like a mini Hudson Yards, and so now VTA is in their preliminary plans proposing that all of that kind of infrastructure that's needed for the extension into Santa Clara County would be capped, and VTA would build up on top.
You couldn't find that, that's great. So Richard has been holding his hand up. Richard, I'll let you have the first question.
Okay, so,
Waited a long time.
yeah, so it has to do with this rapid transit stuff. Can one of you tell me why, when we put in the VTA down Winchester Boulevard, it didn't go by the San Jose Community College, or why didn't it go by Valley Med? Both of those have got great big amount of people going and coming and driving cars all the time. Why didn't the train go by those two places?
I don't know, so, I mean,
So
once
can you
again.
tell me
when I
why
get-
they don't?
No, I don't know. Why the light rail? Those
If you don't know, you
decisions,
don't know. It's okay.
I don't know.
I think
Bad
they tell you
decisions,
why.
bad decisions were made, and even some of the people who,
But don't you
Teresa was still in diapers at that time.
But don't-
Yeah, don't let her.
I don't want to dice with you. Don't you think you should find out why that didn't happen before you start talking about something like this? Because it'll happen again, and we're going around the important stuff if you don't know why they didn't go through the important stuff before.
I can tell you what so I've talked to Rod Senior. They had this vision of creating this circle kind of thing effect around most of the Santa Clara Valley. And, well, I have to be careful. In private conversations I've had with some of the people who really know about transportation, one of the comments that was made was, if Santa Clara County had not funded the construction of the light rail system, we're what we call a self-help county, if we had not done that, it wouldn't have gotten built, because people like the Federal Transit Administration wouldn't have done it, because they the ridership, the way where they chose to build was not compelling in terms of how much ridership it was going to produce right away. So I think now, I mean, very much that's kind of another unfortunate lesson learned. So now we're at a point where you're trying to build some housing and businesses around where you've got this expensive infrastructure. I mean, I think the thing to do now, rather than what some of us that are on the VTA board are trying to get VTA away from building more fixed rail and going to, a lot of people don't like it. They think it's not as significant, it's not as meaningful. It's kind of like the Caltrain or BART is more important than having buses. So, there's a faction in the current VTA board that says, let's not do any more fixed rail. Like the East Ridge and the Vasona, like right now the Vasona light rail extensions on pretty much is on indefinite hold, because the ridership numbers just didn't justify it.
Yeah, because you
And
don't
then
go
East Ridge,
by
same
college,
thing.
or you don't go by Valley Med. Of course the ridership is down.
And I can
Let Chris respond to that.
I can give my sort of my little piece about that as well. So you are totally right. Those are two destinations that are huge destinations that, if you're thinking about a rapid transit option that's going to go from downtown San Jose to Campbell, effectively, you're going to want to hit those destinations, right? But I think a lot of times there's some challenges in transit planning where you go through the path of least resistance, or where you have the right of way, and so that's one where I think I wasn't there, but it's pretty clear that they went along the old rail right of way. And decided to, made a choice to not go onto the surface streets in those areas to connect to those destinations. So that's something that when we were planning for ReX, we, from the ground up, thought about what are those key essential destinations that we need to make sure that we get to, and how do we connect folks as efficiently as possible to those destinations. But you're right, because 20 years from now, let's say, ReX is adopted into the regional transportation plan and is going through local planning processes and whatnot, and then all of a sudden you hit certain, roadblocks and name the roadblock that in terms of transit implementation, and certain decisions get made, it gets watered down, and then it's no longer the thing that, you know, we
Yeah, didn't you say
initially
when nobody's thinking
advocated.
But the
trains,
difference
so
is-
why
yeah.
build more
But the
trains,
difference is
right?
you're not building trains, these are packets, right? So
Well,
you have flexibility to some
And
extent, right?
that's part of the thing, right? Is that ReX, just like bus-based transit, is something that's much more flexible.
Right.
So if you mess up, then it's not, you know, I've heard rail extensions are kind of like getting into a war with another country like Iraq, right? It's like once you're in, it's very hard to remove yourself from that situation because that's hard infrastructure. And so one of the things with bus-based transit is that you can actually do things like pilot projects, which a lot of places are doing, where you can, you know, stripe, you know, transit-only lanes and see what the performance is. And guess what? You know, 6 months later, you see ridership increase, you see the travel times decrease, and it's like, and traffic wasn't impacted. It's like, oh yeah, okay, so this actually works. Let's make it permanent.
Gary, then Carlin. Gary.
You went up to Portland, I go up to Portland quite often,
Mm.
and when I'm up in Portland, I don't drive. I get on their light rail system.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're kind of going away from that, but their rail system works.
Yeah.
Okay, I go to DC, the Metro
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Okay, go to New York, that works.
Mm-hmm.
So here, for some reason, it doesn't work because it doesn't go to where people want to go.
Yes.
This is a good concept, okay? I'm at a meeting the other day, they're talking about the Diridon hub, what a great and wonderful thing this is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's got to connect BART, it's got to connect BTA, it's got to connect this and that.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I raised my hand, I says, where's the connection from the airport to Diridon?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't on any of their stuff. And there's this, oh, that's a good question.
Well,
Okay, and
there's
that's
been a plan
typical,
for it
and let me tell you
for
something,
years.
and no disrespect to you on VTA. When I go to the VTA meetings and I ask the questions, you know, I ask things, oh yes, we'll take that under consideration. I have never gotten a satisfactory answer in any VTA meeting I've ever gone to. And I'm not saying it to
No,
put you down, that's reality.
I completely empathize with your comments, and I would say, as having fought to try to get something in the 85 corridor, and try to get money for Caltrain separations. After also talking to Rod Sinks Sr. a few years ago and Jim Bell and trying to make some sense out of what the heck do we do? You know, I started out very much in the mode of let's finish Rod Sinks' vision, right? From 1992, that map that had the whole loop and the thing down Stevens Street Boulevard. But honestly, right, yes, you can look at Portland as a very successful example of transit. 3 times the ridership per capita.
And a lot more
Right.
density
Yes.
along those lines.
We have more density.
Along
We have
with-
twice as much density as Portland. So there's a lot of mythology around why we can't have transit here. It's crap. Look at Seattle. They're building light rail to the university. Look at Los Angeles. But I've stopped really caring about the mode. I think we need to do what we have with resources as efficiently and as fast as we can. But I do think, right, and I'd be interested in hearing what Chris has to say about this. I do think if we are going to put buses on lanes and freeways, we need the same kind of efficient means we have with trains to load and unload those vehicles quickly, to let the vehicles proceed. If we have to do this nonsense of getting off at a crowded, off-ramp and fooling around and then having to get back on, you've just defeated the whole time thing.
I
So
agree with you.
it seems like
Thank you for your comments.
You need
Thank
a
you.
station or some
Yeah.
connection point to let that vehicle keep going.
And I can agree with you with the rail piece too, and that was sort of the second part of my, what I was intending to say is that it's not really a question of bus versus rail. I think the reason why we have a low-performing light rail system in Silicon Valley is because it wasn't done correctly. Period. Right? Like
many stops.
just if you think about getting from my house to Campbell, I got to go through this like crazy circuitous route.
Downtown
San Jose that
goes like
doesn't
2
make
miles
any
an hour.
sense.
It's run like a street trolley, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's worse than a street trolley. At least a street trolley is direct. Typically. So, you know, I mean, when I think about what the first investments on light rail should have been in Silicon Valley, Alum Rock, Santa Clara Alum Rock, Stevens Creek, El Camino. Those should have been the first. And sadly, they're the last. And that's where still to this day, back then and still to this day, that's where the ridership is at in the VTA system.
So before we get to Carlin, just real quick on the light rail thing in Baltimore at this Podcar City thing I went to a couple of weeks ago, a representative from the company that kind of manages their system there, they're actually looking at taking out, I think it's about a mile worth of light rail, and actually they're looking at automated shuttles. From an operational cost standpoint, it's going to be lower cost, and so they're studying that. But Carlin.
You mentioned that you're looking at an average speed in the HOV lanes of 45 miles an hour. It seems to me that it seems to me that the technology exists today with the even standard. Almost every modern car today has an active cruise control and lane control, and it's a short step to V2V communications, so that you could, by restricting cars instead of putting a stupid blue tag on the car, put a tag on the car that says this car is capable of semi-autonomous 90 mile an hour speeds. And Pelotoning those, you could probably triple that 8,000 per lane. Just
correct.
by the simple expedience of using modern technology to put those lanes in there, because I'm sure that it would be a trivial experience for the Google buses and even transit buses to upgrade to those tools. I mean, right now, Peloton has trucks on highways three deep that are basically slipstreaming each other, both for economy and for the second and third drivers are sitting there sleeping until it's their turn to be the first driver.
No, you're totally right. So the technology obviously hasn't hit yet as far as adoption, and certainly not mass adoption, but there are other agencies that are planning for that technology. So we're at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. Their models, the way that they do modeling, they actually assume in the next 20 years that there's going to be a whole lot of sort of autonomous vehicles, autonomous technology out there. And so with that, assume different assumptions in terms of vehicle throughput.
You didn't make that assumption. You didn't make those assumptions in the input in here, though. So it just gets better as technology matures. Other questions? We've got one here.
It keeps coming up, and I love the autonomous vehicles, and I love the fact that it's not as expensive as rail. But I don't see the commitment from cities and counties. I know the state's really pushing cities and counties right now. Put housing close to these transit hubs, these nodes. What I'd like to see is a commitment from VTA and the cities that if a program like ReX goes in, that these will be areas of medium to high density, so we grow where the transit is, because the traffic is just horrendous. And even for Cupertino residents, when they came to the Stevens Creek Urban Advisory Commission, which I sat on, they kept saying, we need light rail first before we build the housing and grow. And I kept saying, if you don't have the housing and you don't have the jobs, you're not going to get the transit. But if you get the transit, you've got to make the commitment to grow and have the housing.
Yeah, and I think, my city seems particularly recalcitrant at this time, honestly, right? But the state's going to fix that. I'm quite confident the state is going to fix that problem. I think what we have to recognize is that where we've invested in transit in Santa Clara County in the last 25 years have not been the right places. In order for transit to work, you need to go to big job centers. And we failed to do that. North Sunnyvale, as an example, has 42,000 jobs. North Sunnyvale is, so I was listening to a major employer write about VTA, right? bitched forever about VTA, but I said, so what is your specific issue? He said, here I am, here we are in North Sunnyvale. We got Lockheed, we got Google, we got NetApp, we got Microsoft, all this stuff, 42,000 jobs. We're serviced by one VTA bus and one lousy little light rail line that's so bad that only 3% of our employees come. By that means. Now, yes, they have their own bus network, but I think if you then recognize that downtown San Jose has massive transit investment. And I said, well, how many jobs are there? He said 35,000. So we've got to start using more objective and less political measures as we start to make these transit investments and recognize what makes transit work in places like Portland, where they do have 3 times the ridership. Right? Then, yeah, absolutely. Where we put major hubs in, we ought to expect a lot of density, whether that's, and ridership coming from, whether that's from housing or whether that's jobs. I think we ought to consider both, frankly.
Councilmember Sinks, you mentioned the private buses, and if it wasn't for the private buses, the congestion would probably be that much worse. So my question is, how, in your scenario, Chris, do the existing private buses play into that?
Well, 2 ways. One
I
is,
think they're the biggest transit agencies in some ways, right? Sorry.
there's at least 2 ways. One is that the express lanes that are part of the foundation of this network working is going to benefit other types of transit, including the private shuttles. So that's and also those private shuttles will be able to dock at the ReX hubs and the ReX stations. So you can have connections between private transportation, public transportation, the last mile transportation services that you're describing. They won't be able to dock at the platforms, the ReX platforms themselves, but at sort of other locations.
Is that because of the configuration thing or something?
And yes, because to Rod's point, the ReX system is based off of real quick transfers, getting on and off. We have all-door boarding, and the boarding, we have the gates that open and close. Full protection from the oncoming vehicles, and like I said, level boarding. So you can't just have like a regular shuttle that's.
But if they made it to the specifications of that, they could.
Conceivably, yeah. But like I said, there will be other places for them to dock at the hubs, where they folks can make those connections.
I think the trick is to recognize that employees of these big companies have the luxury of riding transit, and they've got to help us realize that everybody ought to have that luxury. Mm-hmm. It's time that we move everybody around and not just, folks that work for our richest companies. And what we have today isn't working for anybody but them. Thank God they're doing it, but it's no longer enough. It's no longer enough to have only Apple, Google, etc. employees have a fast, efficient transit network. And they've got to help us raise the capital to build a comprehensive system that works for them and their employees as well as the rest of us.
Franklin's has one, then you, David. Franklin's with the Neighborhoods Commission too, by the way. Represents.
So I know this is a transportation conversation, but the gentleman over there mentioned that he pretty much essentially talked about chicken and egg things. You have to build the light rail and then the housing will come, or we build the housing and then the light rail will come. I think in San Jose we have a housing issue and building new homes, so if you build these hubs, like, are you guys also working with, other people to allow them to build new housing in those areas, things of that nature? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, and part of what you guys are raising is a question of implementation. So, for example, what goes first? And the what goes first to me is a multi-layered question. First, there's performance. So what corridors are going to have the greatest ridership potential? But then there's also other things, like you're saying, who's planning for housing, who's doing an effective job at housing their population. Should that factor into decision making? I think so. What's the political will? Where's the community support for getting these investments through? Because we know that not all communities are necessarily supportive of transit. So if you have 10 corridors and there's about 5 of them that are as high in terms of performance, and you have 2 of them where you've got the community really rallying behind it. To me, that's the indicator of like, okay, well, maybe we go with those 2 first. But certainly, I think we have to. That's why I had the land use piece first in my conversation, is because we can't keep messing up on land use and housing. Otherwise, we can throw as much investment on transportation as we want, and it's not going to solve the situation. We just can't do that. So we have to reward the good actors, and we need to incentivize the bad actors to be better actors.
David,
Transportation.
David, then Vegas.
Yeah, so I was actually, that's really close to the question I was going to ask, which was, of course, one part of a network is not a network, but I'm curious if there was a sweet spot where you would want to try to do this first, to demonstrate to people that the idea, and you know, you kind of, I think one of the things that's important here is that it's a more integrated 2-tier system. So are there parts that you think, you know, I think it's very much, there's part which is will and infrastructure that exists today.
I think it'd be really cool to pilot, you know, the concept. And you know, anytime you do a pilot, it's not the full actual concept, but you can pilot certain elements of it. And so one thing that you can do, for example, is partner with some of the tech companies and business parks that we serve as part of this network, which is basically anything that's significant, a significant employer, you know, a significant job center, we're serving it in the Bay Area. So those could be good jumping off points where you can have the docking, you have parking available for folks to drive there, to park at the hubs, and then start to pilot with a service of, you know, public service that's frequent might be able to get you. And there's already, what's great is that we already have express lanes that are being built right now that are coming online very soon on 680, on 880, and that's part of the infrastructure that we need. So maybe those are some of the key areas where we, you know, focus in these initial first pilots.
I would actually put a picture, you know, Rod had actually talked about Moffett Park, that Sunnyvale area. I think that actually is a good example of, you know, there's a lot of new density there. That, you know, that's one end, so it's interesting to find where's the other end that would be a good.
Yeah, you can have Bishop Ranch, for example.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, exactly.
And so, you know,
and
there is an
East Bay had a
incentive.
problem with not, you know, no expansion space, but.
There is an incentive for these employers to be a part of this opportunity, right? Because they're paying a huge amount of expense. And if they can put forth maybe a little bit less expense, that happens to be a public option, maybe that's something that's enticing to them, right? Especially if we're talking about the kind of vision here where we get to get their vehicles out of traffic as well. Right? So, yeah. Kirk, you have a question?
Marius, I'll go after Marius.
Marius, then Kirk, and then Richard, you're next. You're after Kirk because Kirk hasn't asked a question yet.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
so
All right.
who hasn't asked questions? Marius.
Okay, first, I don't want to pour cold water on your proposal, but try to conceptualize the hubs. What advantage have the companies, if they have buses, is that they have all the people in one place.
Correct.
And they take them from there, and they go to San Francisco mostly, and they drop them where they live. The rest of us, we live each one in a different place.
Yeah.
If we have to go to a hub, it's like the train station, you have to provide parking spaces. And if it's from the Bay Area, from here, from San Jose to San Francisco, but from San Francisco, from the Bay Area to Palo Alto, if I have to go to a hub and I have to go on a bus and then I have to go, how do I go from the other hub to wherever I want to go in Palo Alto, because there is no other traffic, I have to take Uber. This becomes such an overhead that the hell is it, I will drive. This is one of the problems which we have. And on the long routes, if you think that you will cut 20 minutes, it's not significant. You have to give something to the people to say, I have an advantage to change behavior.
Yeah.
And just to tell you on a separate note, in London, they charge 12.5 pounds every car entering London.
Yeah.
Every day.
Every day. They change behavior. All the Ubers are Prius because the electrical cars are safe. This is the way you change behavior. Either you put a huge penalty or you give a huge advantage. 10-20% saving in traffic, technology will not change our behavior. My opinion. I could be wrong.
So I just had, there are a couple things that I just wanted. One was a comment. One, I like the fact that you're positioning this as a platform. Like, it's agnostic. It doesn't matter what the devices that's going on the network. It's just that you're providing a platform for that, as well as some infrastructure as well. My initial reaction is, I hear VTA is struggling with their current bus system, and they're reducing services, and they're cutting back this and that. A lot of it seems to be doing with operational overhead and lack of ridership. But if you're applying now a new layer of substantial infrastructure and devices, there has to be some level of commitment that they don't all have to be manned by people. And I've heard VTA discussions and at least reading. I've been picking up on things that the labor unions and the people aspect of that is a substantial part of the discussion. So much so that a lot of these other new ideas don't actually get a lot of airtime because it's not clear how the people are going to integrate into that long-term, current people or future people for that matter. So how does something like this, which is a substantial transportation infrastructure network, which if it's not manned by people, then I don't see any problems. But if it's manned by people, the operational management of it is the cost. It's not the infrastructure to set up. That's the easy stuff. It's the operational, in my opinion, of seeing a lot of this. The operational management, the overhead, and how you maintain that network and operate it effectively and cost effectively. So how have you addressed that? And then I would also ask Teresa to comment on what is VTA's position on embracing things that don't necessarily require drivers to be part of the transit system.
Good question. So the last part of your question, just to clarify, there's a really significant infrastructure cost, and there's also a really significant operational cost to run a system like this, right? So just, so anyway, but certainly the operating cost is important. One of the things, I've already mentioned the possibility of partnering with the private sector. But the other thing that's kind of a little bit associated with what the gentleman over here mentioned is that with the London congestion price and the ability to generate revenues to then invest in better transportation options that can help folks shift modes, is that the express lanes, what are you going to generate with the express lanes? Revenue. And where do you put that revenue? Well, you can put it into deferring, and minimizing the amount of, well, basically helping to cover some of the costs of operations and maybe even some of the infrastructure. So that's one, is that's different from just your traditional transit line, is that we have an inherent revenue source that's built in. On the question of autonomy, there's places like Brisbane, Australia, that are putting forth autonomous bus rapid transit with, where they're kind of, they have the guideways and they dock seamlessly with the stations and whatnot. You can have like semi-autonomous transportation as well. We're at this point agnostic as to what should happen in terms of that whole kind of approach. But I will say, as somebody that has ridden a VTA bus more than once, and that has a couple of friends that are VTA bus drivers, is that we have to think about what are the repercussions on these people, right? That this represents a solid job, right? A middle-class job, which is becoming more and more scarce in our society. But secondly, acknowledging the fact that these aren't just drivers. These are social service providers. These are folks that are having to manage conflict on the vehicles and having to address a whole host of different interpersonal relations on the vehicles, right? So if you tell me get on an autonomous bus, or if you tell, even better yet, a young woman to get on an autonomous bus with no, sort of personal supervision, that's in that vehicle, I don't know. We have to address some of those kind of questions moving forward, including the security question. So that's my sort of both on paper we're sort of agnostic, but also a little bit of personal commentary in terms of potential concern.
If I could just follow up, just to, because I hear that, and I hear the having a person there has value, but not necessarily a driver. A driver shouldn't be dealing with stuff going on in the bus, otherwise they're not paying attention to the road.
Yeah.
So, and so that what you're talking about
is a stressful road to be driving and then having to deal with something.
Right. I mean, that makes it pretty. I guess if that's a need, and I think that's a very valid reason to have somebody present, but maybe the role is different.
Yeah,
and I guess it gets to
great
VTA
service.
chair here is to, how is VTA going to address the change in role and allow for discussion without the fear of threat? Because I feel like there's this battle to even have a discussion.
Well, right, and Kirk, I think you're right, and actually, I was in Monterey for 2 or 3 days last week at the California Transit Association, and there were some extremely interesting conversations that went on, and some people with some new approach. I have to talk to Ken about one of the sessions, one of the women that I heard that who's from Canada. But so once again, there's kind of your VTA board is made up of representatives from all the communities, and there's a wide range of thinking there. And actually, I feel like I think sometimes the VTA staff has wanted to move in certain directions, and the political forces sometimes have restrained the professional staff's ability to make changes and progress. But one of the interesting things that came up in some of the discussions last week, and I've talked about it at VTA, and I heard that it's over 40% of VTA's workforce is retirement eligible. And I think it's LA Metro, one of the major systems that was there last week in one of the discussion groups I was in, they have over 50% retired. So one of the other tracks, I was going to a lot of the technology tracks and that kind of stuff, but they have tremendous efforts going on trying to get people to be drivers. So on one hand, you want to make sure that people have good jobs, and the discussion, exactly what you're talking about. What should be the role of the driver? Because like one of the things that we were talking about fare collection. Unfortunately, like here's an example. There is an unfortunate increase in the number of bus operators that are getting attacked. And some of them have been pretty serious. And drivers have been killed. And so actually VTA, their general manager takes this extremely seriously, and so they're going to be piloting a couple of different, there's going to ultimately be a barrier on every VTA bus to protect the driver. And they said most of the assaults happen when the driver has to, there's like a confusion or some issue about the fare. So some of the discussion is, do you simplify your fare structures? Do you do an audit to completely, like the people pay before they get on the bus, so they're not getting in a confrontation with a driver and attacking him or her. That issue about security, so like there's some other pilots that are going on. Do you then basically have like a conductor that's on this vehicle and not driving? And one of the things too that one of these people that spoke last week and talked about the technologies talked about, she said, wait, let's not talk, we have two different things. Whether you're talking about connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles. And she says the two things are very separate. So I'll be honest, at VTA, and I have been supportive of these policy changes, it's like, okay, trying to get your foot in the door. We've adopted an autonomous vehicle policy, and we've adopted a policy on corporate shuttles. And I've been kind of trying to push towards working on, like, okay, how do we do more of that integration between the public system and the private system, particularly when you already have a lot of corporate shuttles that are using VTA facilities for free. With the recognition, yes, they're taking people off the road. So, as I said, there are certain people on the board who wouldn't vote for either of those policies. And it was largely because they felt like they had, because this fear factor that something's going to happen to my job, that not even adopting a policy that says we're going to look at this, we need to be open, we need to understand that the world's changing, and to say, I'm like they're saying, hey, how do you become somebody who can oversee, autonomous vehicles that are out there in the system? How do you become somebody who's managing a station or a hub and all that? So that's where a few of us are coming from. like, let's help, and that was one of my major themes this year. How do we get our workforce and say, let's go on the journey together and let's, you know, not be tied to being the driver of a vehicle that's gonna be totally outmoded.
Yeah.
So,
And
wait.
just to add on one little piece is, you know, ReX is gonna create a ton of jobs. If you think about just like the construction portion alone. My only comment was, when we think about things like autonomy, let's make sure that we have a seamless transition for the workers that are, you know, if it's 30% that are left at that point, let's make sure that we have a parachute for them and we have sort of
Sounds
a.
like they're gonna retire and the rest won't be able to.
So we have time just for a quick 2 questions. We'll get to you, Richard, but we've got to be out of here. She said at 8:15, but let's do it. Rick, quick question, quick answer.
I'll say this, I'm very excited about this proposal because it takes us the paradigm shift from sort of suburbia.
Okay, where's the question?
Yeah, so this is, I think one thing that really is going to work at current environment, something that's very separated, that's not currently, you know, like Rod was saying something about bus stop and transit on Stevens Creek. I don't think that would ever work because when you get down West San Carlos or the Stevens Creek part, there's no way you're going to take a lane away politically, and it's just going to take D-level service and turn it to F. So this is outstanding. But I'd like to see, as David was saying, some type of a pilot in here because I think this is exactly where we need to go. And I'd love to see a pilot around the South Bay portion here, the portion that goes down to 280 and 237, and you know that loop there, 880, and see what we can do because you know we have to understand what our risk factors are, what our additional costs are. I think this will be tremendously beneficial to the company because we want those hubs. Because I think the company shuttles are going to want those hubs so they can pick up there, drop off there. So what we need to do at this point in time, timeline, whatever it takes, to create the South Bay, that South Bay pilot.
So, well, first thing is this is a great tee up. So on your handout, you know, we've got a website, and on there it's a take action page. And so the first thing you can do is register your support as an individual in support of the concept. And the reason why that's important is because the first major hurdle here in making this a reality is making sure that this is, you know, incorporated some way into the regional transportation plan, right? If it doesn't make its way in, then that's a huge setback. And then, yeah, we'll be doing pilots, but we won't actually have a clear path to implementation. But on the pilot front, I'll just say that I'm in conversations with a couple of employers that are very supportive of ReX and that are interested in potentially doing a pilot. So, and one of them happens to be in the South Bay. So, I guess stay in touch.
We will for the organization, Chris.
I'm assuming on this diagram that the majority of the colored lines on here would be managed by transportation agencies, and the gray lines would be private companies, private providers, and not routes that are operated by transportation agencies per se, public agencies.
Yeah, at this point we're agnostic as far as who's going to operate this. There's a lot of questions around who's going to operate it and how. I could see, for example, a regional agency like, say, BART, that would operate a lot of the, you know, the more regional routes, and perhaps the agencies, the local agencies, operating more of the local connecting routes, and that you could have like a source of funds that could make VTA, for example, whole and operating those services. But we don't have, you know, that's a question of implementation, and it's a big question as far as governance. And we don't have Transport does not have a position one way or another right now in terms of what that should look like. So, but there are models out there, places like Zurich.
Talking about the autonomous, a lot of airports have got shuttles that go from terminals to terminals to terminals, and they don't have any conductors on them. So somehow they figure out a way that you don't have to have a train driver driving a train in an airport. Maybe you should talk to some airports, find out how they do that. The other thing is, which I've been trying to do for the last 20 minutes. I keep getting pushed around.
Sneak it.
Why? Everybody else takes their time, why can't I?
Because she's gonna kick us out. So what,
Okay, so, talking about private buses, I had a chance to go to Germany, Stuttgart, Germany, and go to the Mercedes-Benz plant. I happened to see this bus line, 50 or 60 buses all lined up in the parking lot, and I asked my docent what's going on. He says that the people come in from outside the area on a bus. One of the workers drives the bus. They bring people in, they work, they get back on the bus, he takes them back home again. And you're talking about companies like Google and Netflix and whoever else, they could supply a whole bunch of buses, take people off the roads, solve an awful lot of problems if you had a lot more buses.
That's a great way to end it. And one last thing before we go. So I interviewed Gary Mixel with the BTA yesterday, and that video will be up in the next week or so. So maybe we'll send it out, but it talks all about this last mile autonomous shuttle. Very exciting program that he's behind. So with that, let's
on the NAC website.
This is all going to be
I'll start link to it. Yeah. So let's give our panelists a big
All right, and that is a wrap on our trouble. This guy is just trouble. For those of you there, thank you for watching. This concludes the Winchester NAC meeting. Ended a little bit early. We usually go to late 30, but I guess they had to have the room out by 8:15, so about 8:25. So we're a little bit beyond that. But if you have any questions, go to the Winchester NAC website, www.winchesternac.com, winchesternac.com, and all this is obviously available online, and we'll have our presentations there too. So thank you. See ya. Say hi, Jacob.